Welcome to Living Legacy Leadership, where we explore, discover, and share insights, tools, and strategies for a life well lived into elderhood. I'm your host, Donna Kim Brand, author, speaker, legacy strategy coach, and creator of the concept Living Legacy, where you choose to live life on your own terms while contributing to people, places, and projects along your life journey. I believe that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Now, the guests I bring to you each week all address some unique aspect of learning, leadership, or legacy. This helps you raise your own game as a leader in business and life, and also showcases some extraordinary people who exemplify living legacy leadership. At least once a month, I also offer a training session to skill you in game changer thinking for your own application. So get your notebook ready or sharpen up your memory by tuning in your attention, and we'll dive right in. Now, most of these sessions that I have to share with you on Living Legacy Leadership, we talk about, as I say, game changer thinking and timeless issues. Right now, I'm going to delve a little bit into more of a timely issue as we are undergoing a global pandemic with the COVID-19 coronavirus. And there are a lot of interesting issues that go along with this whole situation. Now, the reality is the coronavirus is, or actually COVID-19, does pose a significant threat, not necessarily in its mortality rate, but in its high rate of transmission and its potential to cripple the public healthcare system on a global level, maybe country by country, state by state, and so on. And containment is not only viable, but necessary. Containment or quarantine should not be viewed with hysteria, nor as punitive, but rather should be viewed as the mature, safe, self-administered, and considerate step to take. Now, we know that when people are threatened or backed into a corner, very often basest of our human instincts arise. We get our back up, we get our nettles up, we get defensive, we get protective and retreat. But I'm hoping it leads in another direction, that yes, while you take care of yourself and yours, hopefully through the preparation you've already taken, we actually find ways to step back into a simpler time of life, simpler way of doing things, reassess what's really important and what's going on. The reality is this coronavirus, and specifically COVID-19, affects everyone. There's no ethnicity, no national boundary that is not able to be exposed and infected. Now, upon exposure, anyone of any ethnicity can be infected. If you're infected by this virus, you're a carrier, and you can infect others regardless of whether you are symptomatic or not yourself. Now, I was wondering where the name coronavirus came from. And coronaviruses are named for the crown-like spikes on their surface. And maybe you've seen on the television, they show this big white ball with red spiky things on them that do look little crowns. So, in fact, human coronaviruses were first identified in the mid-1960s, and we don't tend to think of them that way, but both the SARS and the MERS outbreaks in the last 2 decades are examples of coronaviruses. Now, this one, named COVID-19, came from this. CO, out of COVID, stands for corona. VI stands for virus, D for disease, that spells COVID, and 19 because this novel strain of the virus was first discovered just last year in 2019. Now, in humans, the viruses usually cause mild respiratory infections like the common cold, which often self-resolve with adequate rest, appropriate hydration and nutrition, and medications for symptomatic relief. So that's why they say, of course, if you are found to be positive for the coronavirus, as long as you're not suffering severe respiratory systems or you don't have a compromised immune system, you can isolate at home and self-treat as just mentioned. Now, the complications for a small percentage of cases that we've been hearing about on the news, the critically ill and even, sadly, the dead, are having complications of usually related to viral pneumonia requiring acute medical intervention, the ventilators, and so on. Now, the current mortality rate of COVID-19 virus is about 3%, which is significantly less than previous SARS or MERS viruses, but higher than the common seasonal flu. Now, I think we've been pretty well apprised about the symptoms and what they are. But we do need to remember we have legitimate concerns about that high risk of transmission, particularly because some people do not display symptoms or severe symptoms. And it's hard to tell. Do you have a cold? Do you have a little bit of touch of the flu, as you might say? Or is this, in fact, the dreaded coronavirus? Now, many communities, countries, but even local communities, I mean, we've been in denial for some time since this is already happening elsewhere around the world, starting with China. We've just been ill prepared, and we've seen this with the run on shelves in stores for basic supplies, everything from food to basic necessities to medical supplies and medical equipment, even for the first responders and so on. So we also do know that there are those in the population who think, well, first of all, this can't happen to me, not me, but also given that it sort of coincides with spring break, where a lot of university students are often around the globe having fun at the beach and the pubs and the bars and so on, this is crimping their style and they don't like it. And amongst a population that tends to think they're immortal, it's a little bit harder to get them to play along by these very tough, frankly, and isolating rules when they're very social people with this view of their place in the world. However, we do need to prevent the spread, first through containment and then through mitigation. So you want to avoid being around people coughing and sneezing. Although what I found and other people have found is the more we think about not do that, well, then all of a sudden you have to cough and then everybody jumps away like you're a big pariah. But avoid close personal contact, such as touching or shaking hands. I know where I was working a jazz concert on Sunday outdoors, every time someone signed in and paid with the iPad, we wiped it down with disinfectant and our hands too, because of course we were hanging on to their money or their credit cards. And you just never know where or when transition will take place. Obviously, touching any objects or surface with the virus on it and then putting that around your mouth, nose, or eyes where the infection could get into your body is the best thing to avoid. So while there are currently no vaccines available, we can help prevent infection by this washing your hands, often with soap and water, and the statistic says for 20 seconds. And so you have people on TV demonstrating singing the A, B, C, D, E, F, G song, or even Gloria Gaynor singing, I Will Survive. And it takes a full chorus of her song to get through a 20-second hand wash. So what a good way to get your song back up in the charts. And as we've said, disinfect as appropriate and mostly avoid close contact with people who are sick or crowds. And if you are sick yourself, then please stay home and take care of yourself. So, as I mentioned, there's no specific medical treatment unless you become critical and need a ventilator or something like that. At home, if you have a humidifier, it's a good thing because heat and humidity make it difficult for this particular virus to transmit. So for a change, warmer climates are a better place to be in terms of health than colder climates in that regard. Obviously, keep pushing your fluids to hydrate so that your cells throughout your body can keep generating the electrical current and keep up its electrolyte and temperature homeostasis, because this keeps your immune system flashing at a higher level of consistency and support and protection for you. Obviously, the more you can have a healthy sleep cycle, that also affects your immune system and limit your stress. So if you're concerned about symptoms, obviously be in touch with health professionals, but meanwhile, hunker down and take it from there. Now, speaking of which, there's a whole slew of new terminology that's come to the fore with this coronavirus and lockdown and so on. So we are in a state of national and indeed global emergency. We're taking measures that that at any other time in history would have seen as totally draconian, and they're still seen that way by many. And we don't know yet what more might come. We might be on total lockdown like some of the countries in Europe, which Americans, of course, are already resisting against. But this whole social distancing, which is the big word of the moment, has become much more aggressive as we've understood the ability for this disease to transmit. So what's the word? Exponentially. That's the word I wanted. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we start with containment to prevent the spread of this contagious virus, and then mitigation, which is by using preemptive acts to prevent preventative measures to prevent and stymie contagion. Hunker down is a word I used, and a lot of people are using that, where you just kind of settle into this temporary new norm, so to speak, knowing it's not normal at all, but for a little while, there are certain parameters we have to live within and things we have to live without. And that's part of hunkering down. So you have to build up your own sense of resilience and patience and all the rest that goes with that, especially when you are in isolation or on lockdown, either self-suggested or mandated by your government or your health situation. Another phrase that's come up a lot is shelter in place. That's just, wherever you are, even if you're in another country and you can't get back home because of flight restrictions and so on, shelter in place, hunker down, make sure you have the foods, meds you are able to have, get the exercise you need, and so on. In a sense, you are in quarantine where you're cut off from others, either through a choice of your own or no choice of your own. Obviously, any type of communal events are now off limits. We're down to restricting the number of people you're hanging out with to 10 or fewer. But, bars and restaurants and so on are either under curfew or shutting down completely or told to limit their seating capacity to 50% of the norm. It will probably get worse before it gets better. Now, obviously, we talk about treatment and testing, but those are specifically related to the medical side of it. What's also happening, of course, is at the moment, at this time of recording, 37 states have closed all their public schools, which requires then the students either being at home or somewhere during the day, which then affects the parents who happen to be working parents, who are now either out of a job or out of an income, if not out of a job yet, and having to do remote working while juggling having kids in the house. Now, amongst the positives of all this stuff are that people are actually getting to interact with each other, albeit under stressful circumstances. But there's been an incredibly appreciative expression for both our frontline medical community, first responders, but also teachers. Any parent who has to spend even a couple of hours for a couple of days with their young kids and keeping them busy and keeping them engaged and keeping them from being bored can understand what teachers have to go on, have to deal with every day with up to 30 kids or so in this circumstance. So there are a lot of emerging dynamics and things that are going to lead to cultural shifts because of all of these draconian and drastic measures that are happening. Obviously there's the knock-on effect income-wise and social interaction-wise with everything from canceled events and canceled flights, and that's canceled important gatherings like weddings and even funerals that people can't gather to celebrate the life of those who are dying from this particular disease.